So today I'm going to share an update about the NUVEC related projects we've been working on currently. But before I get to those specifics of those projects, I wanted to share just a little bit about our overall research progress or focus here in my lab and some recent projects that relate to the work that we're doing specifically as they relate to our NUVEC related work. Um, the work that we do here in Western Connecticut is focused on preventing human encounters with Ixodes ticks. Particularly, our focus is in the backyard or peridomestic landscape. So in southern New England, it's widely thought that many tick encounters are happening peridomestically, and residents in our region, that is, here in Connecticut and New York State, um, that have tick encounters commonly report or believe that those encounters occurred in their own yards. And this, of course, was reinforced by Mead et al. Study through TickNet a few years ago that showed that risk for tick encounter was associated with time spent specifically on one's own property compared to others' properties or non-peridomestic environments. So the work that we do is, I don't know if this is blocking you at all. Let's see. Okay. The work that we're doing here at Western is focused on backyard or peridomestic settings, as I mentioned, and specifically we focus really on the interface of where humans are meeting ticks in the residential landscape. And so generally, we're seeking to answer the following questions. First, what's the distribution of vector ticks and their associated pathogens in the residential landscape? Two, how do humans become exposed to ticks in this landscape? Three, what control measures can not only control ticks, but also result ideally in the reduction of the human outcomes like human tick encounters and disease incidents. And lastly, for prevention measures that do appear to have a protective effect, what are the barriers to preventing or that are preventing people from adopting these practices? So for today's update, I'm not going to talk about all of these things, but I do want to touch a bit upon them, particularly the first three, as they specifically relate to our current NUVEC projects. So as I said, we think of risk for Lyme and other tick-borne diseases to commonly be peridomestic, and that is because black-legged ticks are commonly found in suburban yards that are specifically those that are adjacent to forested areas. So in an early study, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this study by Gary Maupin and his colleagues at Residential Properties in Westchester County. Oh, I don't know why it did that, sorry. Westchester County, New York. Black-legged ticks were commonly found in backyards, with approximately 90% of those found in forested areas and in the regions adjacent to forests that are often including lawn and transitional ecotone vegetation like grasses, taller grasses, and brushy areas. Fewer ticks tended to be found in the lawn center away from the forested edges. And of course, this leads to the public health recommendation for household members to create a tick safe zone in which to recreate, which ideally is located in an area of lawn away from forested edges. So here you see CDC's recommendation for backyard landscape modifications. The idea here is to create a tick safe zone where people can recreate with limited exposure to ticks. You'll see that most of the recommendations, particularly in the top of this list, are centered at targeting the forested edge region of the yard where ticks present a particular hazard and they're most commonly found. And when we look at, oh, I don't know why, I'm sorry, it keeps moving without me, sorry. The most well studies of these landscape modifications is the removal of leaf litter, and paradoxically, in a recent study by Schultze and Jordan, they showed that blowing leaves out of the grass area into the edge of the forest, like many people do, actually resulted in an increase in nymphs in the forest edge. But nonetheless, a lot of these measures are still not well studied and really are just based on the theoretical our theoretical knowledge of tick behavior and tick ecology. So here again are the common residential landscape measures to suppress Ixodes scapularis. They focus on these particular methods, either discourage hosts by things like deer fencing or planting plants that deer don't like, removing tick habitat, that can be through dryscaping or hardscaping, killing the ticks through chemical measures like acaricides, and avoiding tick habitat, which of course relies on changing human behavior, and then of course modifying the tick habitat, and that includes vegetation management, like some of the things you saw in the last slide. And specifically with the modifying the tick habitat, we see that we need more of the studies to sort of fill the gaps to support these recommendations. So similar to what Maupin and his colleagues did decades ago, showing tick distribution in yards, we similarly ascertained nymphal tick densities in those same residential zones that Maupin measured. And these zones, of course, included forested areas, areas within 3 meters of the forest edge, areas around ornamentals and gardens, and in the lawn center that was greater than 3 meters from the forest edge. And so not surprisingly, we found that nymphs were found in approximately the same proportions in our Connecticut residences as Maupin had found, with the majority of ticks found in the forested areas and within 3 meters of the edge. Nymphs, of course, were found in other zones as well, including the lawn, but their densities were much lower. And of course, knowing where the ticks are commonly found is good, but that might not really paint the full picture of risk. So in a study we conducted asking homeowners participating in one of our backyard tick management studies to complete a daily survey during June when nymphal black-legged ticks are most active. We asked them how much of their time was spent in various zones of the backyard. And we find that most of their time is actually spent not in the highest dense areas of the yard, and instead spent more commonly in lawn areas, both including those adjacent to forest edges and away from the forest edge. And now, of course, just because people spend most of their time in the lawn areas, it may not necessarily result in a tick encounter, right? So we don't actually know. But so I wanted to share a little bit of preliminary data from a study we're currently working on as a TickNet partner. And this is a backyard behavior study that we are working on in partnership with the state of Connecticut and also URI tick spotters. So we ask people who submit ticks either for ID and testing to the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station or to URI tick spotters, those are Connecticut residents, to complete a survey about their activities 5 days prior to detecting the tick on themselves. And what we see is that tick encounter victims actually spend most of their time in lawn areas, either next to the forest and also away from the forest, and in fact, spending more than 2 times that of their time spent in areas of the adjacent to the forest compared to within those forested areas. And of course, this study, this is just preliminary data. And this study is ongoing, so we hope to have more there. But we do sort of continually note that this area, not specifically in the forest, but the area next to the forest, is being considered high risk and an area that needs more target for control outside of chemical measures. So when we look back at those recommendations to reduce backyard ticks, we frequently are coming back here in Connecticut. We come back to the question of is mowing the lawn for what does mowing the lawn frequently actually mean? Does it mean weekly? Does it mean every 2 weeks? Is there an ideal height? There was one recent study published by Megan Linsky and Scott Williams from the Connecticut Ag Station suggesting that mowing lawns did not impact ticks, but they actually found they had limited properties, and they also found very few ticks overall. And so that is really one of the only studies. There are really limited studies on how mowing impacts ticks specifically in backyards. And those studies are really limited by the high variability of wild ticks in the backyard landscape, as that variability often will cause issues with many of our backyard studies anyway, but it's something that we've been thinking about and how to best ascertain that. We also have acknowledged that I think in our region, specifically where we are, this is very common that people are changing how they think about lawns. I don't know if anyone had seen this article in the Washington Post inviting you to save the world by welcoming bugs into your yard. But we have a very active organization known as Pollinator Pathway throughout the Northeast, and very, very active in Westchester County and Fairfield County, Connecticut, inviting people to convert their lawns to meadows, to not mow their lawns in May, to promote pollinator health and biodiversity. And so we are wondering about how this may additionally increase habitat suitability for Ixodes scapularis, specifically in the residential environment, and it has us thinking more about lawns ourselves. And so as we've been thinking about this, we realized we really didn't know what Connecticut residents think about their lawns and how they choose to address taking care of their lawns, particularly during the time of year when nymphal black-legged ticks are most active. So we recently conducted a survey of our Connecticut residents. These data are from 453 respondents. We found that 73% of the properties, people who responded, bordered forests. 66% of the respondents mow their own lawns. And that 39 to 52% of the respondents mow their lawns weekly between May and August. Most of them, 71%, leave the clippings from their lawn mowing directly in the lawn. 60% do not treat with any pesticides, including for ticks or any other pest in their lawn, and had not treated in the last year. And 40% never remove fallen leaves from the lawn between May and August. And so in particular, what we found was that of interest here is that people don't remove their lawn clippings. They leave them there. They're not treating. And of course, their mowing practices vary, particularly in May, and I'll come back to that. But we found that lawn mowing practices, in addition to being motivated by how their lawn appeared, are also very motivated by concern for the environment and concern for pollinators, even more so than their concern for tick management. And so we are just very aware of the fact that considering the environmental concerns of people and the concerns about potentially using chemicals gives us the need to be able to recommend and evaluate landscape-based measures that don't just theoretically work, but have some data behind them. Also of major interest to us was that about a third of the respondents said they had participated in or plan to participate in No Mow May. And of course, we know that May is when, like right now, our nymphal black-legged ticks here in southern New England are emerging. And so we wonder how this not mowing is affecting impacting the survival and perhaps promoting not just pollinators, but backyard black-legged ticks as well. And so I wanted to share just the two major activities we have happening that are related to NUVEC here in Western Connecticut. And our first addresses NUVEC Project Area 3.2, which focuses on vegetation management, and in our case, specifically in the peri-domestic environment. And because of the high variability in backyard tick abundance, as I spoke about earlier, our approach to we specifically wanted to look at the impact of lawn management on ticks at the forest lawn interface of the residential landscape. We decided to do this using tick infested enclosures. And so, of course, many of you are probably familiar with small tick arenas, or even some enclosed plots that some actually NUVEC partners here are using, or have been used in other studies, maybe in larger areas, but in more homogeneous forested plots. And so tick infested enclosures haven't been erected to study a lot of tick movement at the forest lawn interface, specifically one that simulates that of the backyard residential landscape. And so our goal really for this project, it was in two parts. And so my graduate student, Sandra Zapata Ramirez, has been working on this study, and which the first part of she began last year, which actually was included designing and testing enclosures that would allow the tracking of nymphs between lawn and forest. We wanted to be able to maintain similar microclimate environments inside those enclosures compared to outside, and that would discourage tick emigration so that they wouldn't leave, so they wouldn't leave on hosts and they wouldn't crawl out. And so in doing this, we needed to make sure that we had an enclosure that would actually allow us to measure ticks moving around and surviving in these enclosures. And in the second part, which has begun this year, we wanted to optimize what we learned from these enclosures to evaluate the impact of lawn mowing frequency on Ixodiscapularis nymphs, and specifically in this sort of simulated backyard that we've created. So in this first part, our enclosures, we're calling them tick gardens. We had two versions and two versions of each what does that mean? Two versions of each enclosure that we created, and we erected these at our Westside Nature Preserve, which is on our Westside campus here at Western. It's in Danbury, when this was last summer. And mind you, I'm going to show you these two versions, but you should note that these versions went through multiple iterations before they ended up being what they are. What they ended up as is what I'm going to show you. And the nymphs that we invested into these enclosures last summer were actually derived from field collected adults that we collected at the same location the previous fall. And thanks to Tom at URI for rearing these to nymphs for us so that we could infest them, and if they were to escape, we didn't worry too much about introducing something new. So our first version of the garden included an 8 by 4 foot modified crop cage. We removed the top and replaced the top with a chicken wire to keep birds and other animals out. We had two zones, so half of the enclosure was located in forested leaf litter and half was in the lawn. There was an edging, which eventually we put tanglefoot on the edges of to keep the ticks from crawling out, because they did crawl out. We measured microclimate, that is temperature and relative humidity, within the different regions of our enclosures and outside. And we released ticks in the lawn and in the forest. Then they were marked. So part of this assessment involved assessing 3 different tick marking methods as well. And then ticks were sampled in 1-inch or 1-foot grids using a press board at least once per week during the summer. And in addition, our second version, we kind of ended up calling it our racetrack, and this was a longer version of our enclosure. We found that our first version was kind of limiting in terms of its size, but also ease of sampling. So in this version, it was 1 by 16 feet, so it could go 8 feet into the forest and 8 feet out into the lawn. We released ticks only at one location, just at the edge at the ecotone, and could monitor which direction the ticks were moving in. Again, we sampled using pressboard at least once per week. A lot of that was dependent on our weather conditions because we had a lot of rain, and again, we used tanglefoot to keep them in. So in our first tick garden, and our data are aggregated for both together here, we found that by the 10th day we were able to recover 50% of the ticks that were originally deposited. And by 3 weeks, that is day 18, 30% of the ticks were recovered. We found that most ticks remained within a meter of their release site. We also found that ticks were moving in both directions between the forest and the lawn overall. We found that 22% of the ticks recovered had moved from lawn to forest, as compared to 4% moving from forest to lawn. But overall, we found that this design was very difficult to use. A lot of it had to do with the mesh on the sides of this enclosure. And we also found varied success with the different marking methods. We had a hobo failure. So we learned that we could track the tick movement, and then we moved on to this other design where we had a hard top that was easier to remove from the enclosures. And this was our racetrack tick garden. And we found at 2 weeks we had a 48% tick recovery. By day 20, we had a 39%, and at day 30 we had a 32% tick recovery, which we thought was pretty good, that we were recovering ticks about a month in at 30%. So most of the ticks, again, remained within a meter of the release area, but a few of them we did see move more than 2 meters from the release area within 14 days. So that crawling rate is about 0.2 meters per day. Overall, we found that nymphs moved farther in forested areas compared to lawn, but we did find that 22 to 35% of the nymphs recovered were from the lawn areas. So that was a significant number, and it does really sort of coincide with what we see in our backyard field studies, as well as what Maupin showed in his work. So our microclimate was similar inside versus outside our enclosures. And we haven't fully analyzed all of the microclimate data from our hobo loggers, but what we noticed is that overall, the temperature and relative humidity range and daily fluctuations were greater in the lawn areas compared to forest areas. So it's possible that the more constant environment in the forested leaf litter may just promote tick movement more readily. So part 2 of this work that Sandra is conducting is our mowing study, which we are just launching right now. And this uses the hypothesis that frequent lawn mowing will reduce host-seeking Ixodes scapularis nymphs in lawn areas within 3 meters of the forest by decreasing habitat suitability. In particular, we think that it will decrease relative humidity, and the ticks will not do well in this environment. Our design, we've scaled up for this. Our tick enclosures now are overall 4.5 meters by 1.5 meter in size, and they are covered with a PVC sort of framework on top that is in pieces that can be removed. I'll show you a picture in a moment. And that is covered with a wire mesh so that host animals will not come in and take our ticks out as much as possible. Again, we use the tanglefoot, but you'll see in this top view here on the bottom right that the area that we are actually treating is within 1 meter by 4 meter space, and then surrounding the edge of that is just a soil barrier, and that's to keep vegetation from growing up the sides of our enclosure and getting stuck in our tanglefoot and also letting ticks crawl out. So we have a little buffer zone, which is why these have kind of a little bit of an odd dimension. And so you'll note that the 3 meters, most of our area for sampling is actually in the lawn adjacent to forest. So we have 9 enclosures that we are using in a randomized block design. We have 3 blocks and 3 treatments per block, and those treatments include our unmowed control, our weekly mowing, and treatments that are mowed every 2 weeks. So our site has been prepped earlier this spring, and our enclosures are actually just they were erected, but we're just finalizing their setup this week. And we'll be infesting this week. Each enclosure will be infested with 300 nymphs, and they'll be released in the forest area of these enclosures. And the enclosures are going to be sampled weekly. And instead of using a press board, we're using a modified small flag because we noted with the enclosures last year, the press board was really smushing down the grass and really not making it like the grass we would see in one's backyard. But in previous arena studies that we've worked on, we've had success with a mini flag in collecting ticks. So we also will be marking our new captures with a unique color each week, and that's with a fluorescent powder, which we tried 3 marking methods, and we found the powder to be most effective. Mowing will be conducted using an electric hand shear, just because we can't really fit a mower in there very well. And we'll mow to 3 inches. We found in our mowing survey that most people prefer a medium length lawn, so we're going with 3 inches, and the clippings will not be removed, also as informed by our lawn mowing survey. And of course, we'll have data loggers in the forest and lawn zones to be able to ascertain changes in those areas. So our main outcome measures for this study will be the proportion of ticks migrating from the forest into our lawn areas, but also we hope to be able to measure the survival rate of our ticks, and that will be based on the weekly recapture of our marked ticks. So we'll be marking them uniquely each time they're captured so that we can ascertain how long they are surviving in the lawn areas. So that's our one major project that started last year that we will be finishing this year. I did want to say that we don't know. We haven't put ticks out this early in the year, so we hope that the ticks are going to survive. We actually, but we have a plan B in case they don't survive, and we can put them out again if needed. We can reinvest in a few weeks. Okay, so our second major project is related to itch, and that's part of the NUVEC focus area 1.2, which is optimizing tick control. And of course, in itch in our NUVEC organization is your tick control helping. And in Connecticut, our itch project is focused specifically on the use of cedar oil-based products to suppress black-legged ticks in the residential landscape. And this project is being conducted by our new master's student, Sophia Kiaya, here in Connecticut. And so for itch in Connecticut is tick control helping with the subtext, if you use cedar oil. What we find is that in our region, a lot of people seem to be asking for cedar oil. We know there are a lot of companies that are offering a cedar oil-based product, and we have very limited information about how well these are working in the real-world setting. Our knowledge of these products is limited to really the study by Dyer and Mather looking at a variety of natural products in arenas in Rhode Island. So in the spirit of many of our itch studies, we are focused on residential property sampling. And specifically, we are recruiting properties that are treated by a PCO with a cedar tick control product. And then we are similarly um, sampling at untreated properties as well. Our recruitment goal is 30 treatment and 30 control, although uh, we'll see how that's going to go this year. I'll explain later as we proceed with this. But we plan to sample 3 to 4 times between late May and mid-July using the standard itch residential protocol that we all had come up with last year. And our recruitment is using professional landscape PCO companies, plus recruiting properties through the Itch One survey from last year and this year, and also using public recruitment tactics. And just to, for full disclosure, we actually had approached this at first using one PCO company, who's actually a landscape company as well, that we know applies synthetic product. They use Tempo, and they also have clients who use Cedar Cure, and they also have clients who just don't treat. And we had been working with them, and they were eager to help us to recruit some of their clients to participate from those who treat with their cedar product, because they wanted to also know if what they're using is working relatively well. That has changed a little over time because for a number of reasons, and I'll come back to that. But I'll let you know. Okay, so our inclusion criteria are residents in Connecticut, or if people live in just the towns that are just bordering us in Dutchess and Westchester counties. Occasionally, we've had studies that have included properties that are just 1 or 2 miles over the border with great tick habitat. And these properties must border or contain forested areas and need to be a minimum of a half an acre in size. So our treatment properties will be current cedar oil-based tick controlled customers. We're not including customers whose cedar product contains any additional pyrethroids or pyrethrin, and they would not have any other tick treatments or pest control in their lawn in the last year. And our control properties similarly would have no tick treatments or lawn or pest control in the last year. So just, again, this study is just launching now. We thank you to UMass for helping us get our amendment from IRB approved recently. So we're just in the recruitment phase now. The properties that we have been able to recruit, or that are on our recruitment list right now, are treated with Cedarcide, Cedar Cure, and tick kills. To our knowledge, we have had a bit of PCO pushback. We have difficulty identifying the products used. That's coming from both ends. Homeowners don't know, or they don't have any paperwork that states what they use. The PCOs do not want to tell us what they use, and state law in Connecticut requires PCOs to share the label and tell clients what they are using when they deploy a acaricide or any pesticide in their yard. But as we are not clients, they don't seem to have to tell us. And so it's been a little bit of work to get our potential enrollees to figure out the product details about the product, so we can investigate that and make sure that it's something that falls within our inclusion criteria. We do have varied application methods by our companies. And then, of course, we've been ground truthing our potential treated properties and found that some of them actually lack good habitat, which speaks to another issue with some tick control practices, which is that these companies may be treating even if there really isn't a high risk in those particular properties. And we're also finding that some of our potential homeowners are using additional measures, and specifically we have a lot of people who report using tick tubes. And as we have varied studies on the effectiveness of tick tubes, we've excluded them. And so, I mean, I really would love to hear what the rest of this group has to say or recommend regarding working with these natural products, or particularly in dealing with PCOs for this type of work, because I do sense we're getting some pushback, and understandably, we're not trying to ruin anyone's business, but we certainly want to be able to make some evidence-based recommendations. And so we hope that if we're not able to get the full scope of treatment and control properties this year, that we can scale it up next year. We're hoping there can be some alignment with the other state activities, and depending on the variety of products that we find are being used by people in our area, we may perhaps like to concomitantly do some arena study work similar to what Tom's group is doing in Rhode Island, but with products that may not be already on his list. So thanks to everyone who helps us or has been helping us with this work. And yeah, I'd like to hear what everyone has to say or any questions. That would be great. Where's my video? There it is. Oh, hey, Lars.
Hey, Nita, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hey, good stuff. It's really nice to see some experimental work on the residential properties in addition to all the observational studies that have been done or not done in the past. You know, having known that this is a problem area for decades, it's astonishing how little is known about what the ticks are actually doing on the properties. So I had a couple of questions. You
Okay.
think, well, the forest versus lawn tick movement, etc. Do you have a higher recovery efficiency in the grassy areas than you do in the forest for the ticks that are there?
A higher recovery in the,
In
can you
the
say in the
in the
lawn?
Yeah, do you find a higher recovery of the ticks that should be on the lawn in the lawn than in the grass and than in the forest, just based on the lawn being easier to sample?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, so it varied, and actually, so overall, I mean, as time goes on, the ticks were being reduced in, on both sides, right, in the lawn and in the forest. And what we found, so there's two parts to this. One is that we find that it seemed like with increased sampling, like the more closely sampled these areas where the ticks were not moving as much. So that's why we sort of backed off and started sampling less frequently, so we could actually ascertain that movement. In the first enclosure, more ticks were recovered overall in the forested areas than in the lawn. But in the second one, we actually more ticks were recovered in the lawn than in the forest. But more ticks they had moved more in the forest than they had moved in the lawn. So it was kind of interesting. But I don't know that we know overall that we're going to continue to see that, because we just had such a limited sample size there.
So based on what you've seen so far, would you make any changes to the recommendations for xeric barriers in the ecotone, whether to use them or whether to make them wider?
I don't know, to be honest, like, because we didn't evaluate that, and I mean, our feeling is that people aren't going to put in a xeric barrier, and so I don't know, and it's something we originally in one of the original enclosure designs, Sandra had put in some mulch barrier, but it wasn't as wide as 3 feet, and it just made a mess, and it was hard to, like, you couldn't keep it intact, and that was abandoned really quickly. I do wonder about other xeric types of um, interventions, for example, diatomaceous earth that may inhibit ticks, not just by drying, right, but also by maybe scarring up the cuticle of the tick. And I looked for some data about that. There seems to be limited work. I wonder, it feels like as a homeowner myself, I mean, we have 3 acres and 3 sides of our property is wooded. I think about I would much rather sprinkle diatomaceous earth than have to deploy and maintain like a dry barrier, particularly if it's mulch or wood chips. Like that just seems like not tenable.
Fair enough. So one last one for the PCO study. It feels like on you have an awful lot of variability in terms of if you have different PCOs applying different products and they're doing it in different ways. It's kind of you'll have trouble with whether it's a bad product or if it's bad application, knowing that. So I guess in terms of if none of these products work at all, the results should be pretty clear. But if some of them actually work pretty well, there might be a lot of variability just based on the design.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's not ideal. Our initial approach seemed really great. We were really excited because we were going to work with one company, work using one product, one method of application, and the same company was applying using the same like applying the same areas of the yard. So we felt really good about that. And there's it's hard to know if the PCO company who was really gung-ho and on board at the beginning is just really busy or just is starting to rethink this from a profit-making standpoint. And they are helping us. We do have some of their clients who are interested in on board, but um, in our ideal world, we'd have one one applicator to measure. But I think in keeping the spirit of the itch work that's been happening over this last year with like in Rhode Island with having just treated untreated properties, we're hoping we can at least get some sense of what's happening. But I do agree we're going to need more. This is just like one step in a really sort of many steps that need to be taken. So yeah, absolutely, we this is just a baby step.
Thanks, Nita.
Sure, Andrew.
Nita, you've been super busy. It's
Oh
great to
my
see
God.
you. So thinking about the racetrack, do you have any idea where the 50% that disappear are going? Are they getting stuck in the tanglefoot? Are they going under the barrier? Just like more just curiosity than anything.
So I think that's a really good question. I think that a lot of them are dying. And but of course we have no way to know that for sure. But I know that in Tom's arena studies, they don't entangle, right? Tom, you don't keep the ticks in
Correct.
the tanglefoot, and they have loss of ticks as
They
well,
just
some
get
attrition.
consumed by
Yeah,
the
I mean, without the tanglefoot, we lost a lot more ticks. So
Mhm.
they were going out the back end, like into the forest.
Mhm.
And so we had to stop that. And so yeah, I think we planned this study with the 9 enclosures to account for the attrition of those ticks, which is why we put so many ticks in
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to start. But yeah, I don't know. Tom might have some thoughts about what happens, but we've tried in past studies to like pull up the vegetation and the soil and the leaf litter and find the dead ticks and never had any luck. So
Um, and then with fluorescent marking, if you mark the same one with two powders, you can see both colors.
uh
You collect them multiple weeks, or is it?
oh no, well, so no, I think I maybe you misunderstood me. So we you're talking about in the mowing study that's coming up.
Yep.
So no, those ticks each week they'll get a unique color. So if they were caught on week one, say they're pink, and then on week two, if we catch them again, they stay pink. But if
Okay.
we catch a new one, it becomes
Okay.
orange
So you
or
measure
whatever.
the first capture, but then after
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. They
Okay.
and
No, that's
so
fine.
yeah. So that's
Okay.
all, just so we know when they were collected. Yep.
Yep. Okay. And then the PCO study. Yeah, this is the problem we've been running into everywhere is that some places are using proprietary blends and they're kind of the regulation and reporting around that is murky and then um it's not clear. Yeah, I mean this is the part of the reason that Allie decided to go with an experimental study because
Mhm.
it was too hard to get more control. Um and then the kind of the meta question here is do we really want to measure the efficacy or the effectiveness?
Mhm.
I mean, ideally like a experimental efficacy would be great, but then who knows what that actually translates into when PCOs actually use it. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I
Yeah,
guess going back to Lars's point, if all of your results show no impact, then it's easy. Then we can just say that basically none of this works. But if
yeah.
you see this weird mix of something's working, and then I guess it does like help us figure out how much may be the applicator either skill or thoroughness or something.
Hmm.
If the same group, yeah. Anyway, we
Yeah,
can maybe tease out a little bit of that, but yeah, it's a hard problem.
it is a hard problem. And I think that, yeah, you're absolutely right. There are so many challenges to this. And we haven't enrolled our cedar properties officially yet. And I think, as we're still getting people interested, we are going to try and hone that as much as we can. I mean, gosh, ideally, it'd be great if we had the one company, we can get everybody and like a
And just get them
truck
trained up.
mounted sprayer. And yeah, and I mean, people really are believing that their cedar product is working very well. So it'll be really interesting to see, especially two of those products that we know that our potential enrollees are using are ones that were analyzed in Tom's study. That was the cedar side, and tick kills, which had both like 5% control and not significant at all. So
So is the formulation of those pretty similar? Sorry, this is the last question. I'll let other people go.
I don't know. I don't know if Vicky wants to weigh in on that because she's been like looking at these labels a lot. But we know that, yeah, they don't tell you a lot because they don't have to, right? They're exempt from registration. They just say like cedar oil blend but yeah, I don't know, Vicky, if
Yeah,
you.
I think, yeah, I've been staring at them, but I can't remember what's to tell you right now. But I feel like Tick Kills has some other essential oils in it, or one essential oil in it, and Cedar Side and Tick Kills both have these additional chemicals that supposedly are non-active ingredients and are approved for use with the minimum risk pesticides. So, and the percentage of the random cedarwood oil may be slightly different. So a
Yeah.
lot of variables, yeah. But the homeowners have been able to mostly get the labels, mostly. So that's good.
Yeah, and just one more thing I was thinking that I mean, ideally it would be great if we could recruit people who are interested in having their properties treated, and then we treat them, right? Kind of in the way that
Allie's doing the same.
Valley is planning in Maine. And we did discuss that a lot just in the last week as we've been having like pushback from some of our PCOs.
Yeah.
But here we are. We've started down this path, and I think we're gonna go for it, and we'll see what happens. And I think we look forward to sharing whether it works out and we can build on that and scale up, or if we're gonna crash and burn, which I'm very realistic about this because we've done a lot of backyard studies and things don't always go the way we want, but we'll try. We're
Or
gonna
if we
keep.
have a super wet summer again. Anyway.
Yeah. Bill.
All right, thanks, Neeta. It was nice to see what you've been up to. I'm just curious, and maybe this could be for anyone's study, itch study. I'm not familiar with PCOs and this aspect of tick management, but how do they market their products? Like what do they use as evidence that their products work?
Yeah, they don't need evidence. They can just say it. And with an exempt product, they are not required to provide data as to the safety or efficacy of their products because they're considered minimum risk by the EPA. And so I think, as I understand, at least for repellents, EPA exempt products can advertise that they will repel or kill a vector, but they cannot say it prevents Lyme disease. And so I think as long as they stay within within those parameters, they're safe. And businesses are businesses. I mean, we've called businesses directly to ask them what they apply, and they will shut us down immediately and not tell us. And they'll just say it's a proprietary blend. none of your business. And one company actually said something like, well, we offer a money back guarantee to our customers if they find a tick. So if you find ticks, you're going to kind of mess us up. So, I mean, I get it. They have a bottom line and they have a business, and certainly we're not trying to get into some legal, scuffle with PCO. So I think, we sort of move towards like, okay, if we go from the homeowner end, they can let us come on their property and sample, and it's not going to get us some hot water, which is kind of how it's. I had called Tom this past week having a little bit of a freak out, thinking we're going to get sued and people are going to be mad, and I don't want any of that. So we're treading lightly, and so.
So it sounds like this industry needs more regulation, right? Am I just late to the?
Well, I mean, I think the challenge is there's probably a really big spectrum of PCOs, and some really want to get more or better evidence to have a better tagline. But then on the other end of the spectrum, there are some that are very happy to never collect any data.
Yeah. So similar to that, we have one company we worked with on several studies here who do a synthetic pyrethroid, and they apply bait boxes. And we studied their bait boxes in Connecticut at 650 homes, and they didn't look very effective. And we went back to them just to tell them, and they were very much like, we don't care. We have Dolan's paper from 2004 that show, at this limited number of properties that they work great. So we don't really care what your science says. And I don't work in a business environment, but I can respect that they're doing what they have to do. So it stinks and I hate it, but it's not surprising at this point. I think we just know that people are out they're making a buck, and it's the Wild West, and absolutely, Bill, we need more regulation. So hopefully this can help going in that direction.
So along those lines, I wanted to chime in. So we work with two PCOs. One is a company that's local to Cape Cod. So they've got like 1,400 customers. It's a family business. And they were connected to us through the county extension person there. And they've been great. They're like wide open to collaboration. They want to have the best information they can. They want to be able to tell their customers what to do. And the other one is Bartlett that Tom introduced us to. So Tom's using Bartlett in Rhode Island, and we've reached out and got customer bases in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Same deal. Like they just said, this is something we want. Bartlett said to us, this is something we've wanted. We've been calling this for a while for this kind of study. So they're very much on the side of the angels, I guess you'd say. So I'm wondering, is there a way? So in the proposal for NUVEC, we had proposed about creating affiliate networks. And I'm wondering if the creation of these companies that sort of that are cooperative, if we include them as we don't have to bash anybody, but by including people, we could make them more recognize that they're sort of doing the right thing. And Lars doesn't like that. What is it, Lars?
Oh, no, I like that. And I mean, I think there are good companies out there and good companies that can be worked with. And the Upper Midwest guys are working with one company on these topics too, a private company that they have a good working relationship. So I think there are there are a spectrum, but I think it's important to find the good partners out there. But I was just thinking for one more for Neeta, that if there is and Andrew, if there is no efficacy of the product, you can't have effectiveness. So it seems to me the efficacy comes first.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think with the companies like the ones you're mentioning, Steve, like they have a really large client base, and maybe cedar or natural tick control is just one small piece of their big business. And so it's not a risk to them. And that's why the company we were working with originally, Olmsted, that's similar. I mean, they're not as large. They're more like in Western Connecticut and Southeast New York State. And cedar is just a very small piece of their business. And so it would be great if we had more larger partners like Bartlett or others that could be willing to get on board to kind of help, answer these questions so we can give homeowners some, ability to make informed choices. But I mean, it's really amazing to me. I think it's like they get sprayed and they don't see a tick, and so they think it works. But how many people actually see a tick in general? It's really actually pretty low when you think about all the properties out there. So I just, that logic it's a little alarming. I think that needs to all go hand in hand with some of the our education piece as well.
I mean, based on Tom's data, every customer should be asking for a money back, right? So it just means there aren't enough ticks for them to notice to ask for the rebate, probably.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I think people want it to work, and so they believe it does. And even when you show a study like that, like Tom's, I feel like it still isn't even enough. Like, seeing is like you need to walk into their backyard and show them some ticks. So it's unfortunately the science, like handing out a scientific paper is not getting us very far. We need more TikToks. I don't know. Anything else? I think we're done. We're out of time.
Great. Thanks so much, Neeta.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Great to see you and good luck.
Nice presentation, Neeta.
Yeah,
Thanks all. See you later.
well done.